If you know anything about gaming, you know about Soulsborne games. Their gorgeous imagery and disgusting enemy design, but if nothing more, you've at least heard of how difficult they are. Each game adoring dozens of ass-kicking bosses for you to spend hours defeating. Every title is universally beloved by gamers, but when it comes to myself, I've always been critical of them. By that, I mean I don't blindly love the games just because FromSoft made them. Therefore, I only played a couple, but in preparation for Shadow of the Erdtree, I decided I would play and rank every single game and DLC in the entire series. So for the past 6 months, that's all I've been doing. Typically in ranking videos they go from worst to best, but I wanted to also talk about the improvements each game has made as FromSoft made more games. So I'm going to be going in order of release and giving the game score and rank at the end. If you want to skip between games, feel free to use the time codes below. And without further ado, let's begin the Soulsborne series review. The first game in the series and the first one I ever played was Demon's Souls. I've only ever played the remake, so for the sake of the video, that's what I'll be referring to. This one is really unique compared to my experience with the rest of the games, because I hadn't played nearly as many games back then as I did now. Every other game other than Elden Ring I've pretty much beaten one long marathon this year, so I was a lot more critical in between those titles. So when I first played Demon's Souls, I was a lot more tolerant than I am now. I mean, this game took me an entire summer to beat. I would never let a game go on that long nowadays. Because of my tolerance, this is one of the only Souls games I spend a lot of time just exploring and grinding. Some days would just be spent on me getting souls for some useless ring or checking out a new area. This helps personalize the game more for me, even with so many things dragging this game out. Most notably checkpoints. The only checkpoints you get are in boss rooms after you beat them, so every time you die to a boss, you have to run all the way back through the area. There will always be enemies trying to attack and chipping off your health, making the fight harder. Sometimes you could open up passages to make it quicker, but not always. I think this is the most obvious example of me just not caring about how much time this game took me, because I could never do that shit today. I remember having to do a 5-minute long death march each time I lost to a boss, yet it never sours the game for me. Not only this, but it was my first, so I really sucked, meaning I died a lot more often. There's also dumb stuff like always being on half health, the game getting harder as you die more, and having to buy heals every time you use them. All this stuff I know I'd hit today never bothered me back then. This sort of applies to the good stuff too. I have so many fond memories of some areas in the game. I spent absolutely forever on the first level trying to get up the stairs with all the enemies throwing bombs at me and going through all the little depots. I remember being so scared of the dragon whenever it shot fire all over the bridge. All of this little stuff stuck with me for so long because of how much time I spent with the game. This level is only one example. The Tower of Latria has such a spooky but enchanting vibe. I was so scared walking around the prison. I love the green and black aesthetic of the whole area. The Shrine of Storms is so cool. There are a lot of places in the series with a bunch of flying dragons circling you, but in here there's flying manta rays, and the graphics are so beautiful. The only level I really don't like is the Valley of Defilement. It's like a 4-hour punishment for playing the game. A lot of the bosses that get a lot of scrutiny for being gimmicky are ones I really liked, like the Dragon God and Storm King. The visuals really turn these fights into spectacles. It's so cool when the Storm King is soaring over you. And of course there's a lot of annoying stuff like the Fool's Idol where you have to kill some random guy or the boss will just keep reviving, or the Armor Spider doing this dumb gasoline fire move, but it's all stuff I can't help but look past whenever I think about Demon's Souls. I can't help but feel like this is all really bad reasoning for liking it, because I know that this is at the bottom of so many people's lists. But there is some genuinely good stuff about the game, like its level system. I love it, and I really wish more Souls games did it, where instead of having one big branching world where there are 50 different paths to go down but only one is the right one, and if you get stuck you're kind of screwed, Demon's Souls have 5 different levels, each with 3 to 4 bosses in them. They're each linear with their own unique designs, and the best part is that if you're stuck on a boss, you can just try out another area in the meantime. This makes it so that as you progress through the game, you're slowly making it through each area as you level up. It's a really efficient way to dole out progression. I know this seems like kind of an unfair viewpoint of the game, but I swear that this is the only one where my connection to it significantly alters the score. From here on out my reviews will solely be based on how I think the quality of the game is. It's just that whenever I look back on Demon's Souls, I can't help but have fond memories. The first game out of 15, Demon's Souls, gets a B+ and is my 6th favorite Soulsborne game. Next we have the most iconic in the series, and one of the most iconic games of all time, Dark Souls, and I am not a huge fan of it. For starters, I played the remaster, and for some reason it looks like ass. You could have told me that this was the original, and I would have believed you. There's minimal design to any of the structures. You walk into some rooms, and it'll just be wide open with nothing there. There's so many sections where you can see how manufactured the enemy placement is. Like they're just waiting there for you to come fight them, rather than being actual living beings inside of a world. And to top it all off, this is the worst looking game in the series. This came out in 2018. How does it look like this? Demon's Souls came out 2 years later, and it's insanely better. God of War and Red Dead Redemption 2 came out the same year, and they blowed this out of the water. This shit looks worse than the previous title, Dark Souls 3, which came out 2 years prior. What were they doing with all this development time? They must have been just sitting around for years, then the day before release they updated the ray tracing or something. Those are just my problems with the technical side of things. When it comes to the game itself, it's by far the easiest in the series, yet still somehow finds a way to be complete bullshit. The Gaping Dragon has a hitbox on its leg, the Capra Demon has 2 dogs with it, in this tiny hallway of an arena. Seriously, whose idea was this? See, the Scaleless can permanently set you to half health until you buy an expensive item to cure it. Unseen and Smo isn't a good fight. It's not because it's hard, which it's not. It's because you have to just run around for 30 minutes occasionally getting hidden because there's always going to be one of them defending the other. Nito keeps spawning these dumbass skeletons. The only way you can kill Ceaseless Discharge is by cheesing him. If you don't, you're clinically insane. And Bed of Chaos is just stupid. It was a stupid idea and they should have scrapped it. You have to keep ramming your head at it until you get lucky and make it inside. So many really bad bosses. You could tell this was a studio still trying to find their footing on how to make the style of game they were pioneering, but damn, even I could have told you some of these ideas were dumb. The saving grace of these fights is the fact that they have no health. Literally none. Before the second boss, I got a big ass sword, and I killed some of these bosses in 10 hits. 10. How does this happen? Whenever you look up a FromSoft difficulty ranked, you'll always see Elden Ring near the bottom because you can overpower your guy, and Dark Souls near the top. But there are so many bosses here I'd be under 5 tries because I could just spray and pray. Maybe it's because I played so many beforehand, but how does anyone find this hard? There are all these dumb bosses, but the power scaling really overshadows it, making it null and void. Now the real challenge is the level design. No amount of overpowered weapons can save you from this. For starters, I'm not a huge fan of the Metroidvania style layout. Typically in Metroidvanias, you're locked off from later areas because you don't have certain abilities yet, but this game does it through you not being strong enough. Except the problem with this is that it's hard to tell whether or not the game is just being bullshit or you're really not supposed to go there. When I first started, I spent an hour trying to get through the skeleton caves before my friend told me about the real way. Granted, I probably should have figured that wasn't the right way because of how strong they were, but I didn't know it was a Metroidvania at the time, and I figured it was just Dark Souls being Dark Souls. This layout also makes it so that you're spending a lot of time just looking for the right way to go. And you can also spend just an hour on something optional and get nowhere. It doesn't help that the areas themselves suck. There are so many iconically bad areas in this game. Blighttown sucks, you got this pinwheel area where you have no idea what the fuck is going on. Tomb of the Giants is terrible, you literally can't see anything, so the whole time you're just wandering around hoping you're going the right way. Nulando Ruins have these ghost guides who can go through walls and chase you throughout the whole area. There's this dungeon full of bugs and rats. Lost Isolus is just a fucking lava pit. So many really bad areas. Part of the charm about these games is how hard they are, but Dark Souls often blurs the line between hard and bullshit, making a lot of the experience just not fun. It doesn't help that they don't give you the ability to teleport until about halfway through, so whenever you finish a long area, you have to go all the way back through it again. I do like Sten Fortress though. It gets a lot of hate, but I like the traps. Dark Souls is a pivotal title in the history of gaming, but it is also one that does not hold up well at all, and my least favorite of the games. Dark Souls gets a C- and is at the bottom at number 15. The DLC of Dark Souls, Artorias of the Abyss, however, is better. Slightly. I think it's funny how often when I enter a boss room in Soulsborne games, I'm praying that it's easy so I don't risk rage quitting, but all my favorite bosses are the ones that have taken me the longest. The DLC starts out with an underwhelming fight against this dog who I rolled, but Knight Artorias is the first taste of what boss fights would become in the series. He's fast and aggressive without being too fast for your rolls. He's one of the only bosses in the game which I actually had to learn his attacks. You'll see as we go along in the video that I really like bosses who are aggressive but fair, and Knight Artorias is a perfect example of that and a really fun boss. Unfortunately, the DLC continues past this point. Ulasil Township, or however you say it, is another classic unfun Dark Souls area, and then it follows it up with a 1-2 punch, the Chasm of the Abyss, where it's pitch black. My favorite. And there are these ghouls who follow you around and you can't kill them. Luckily, once you have the area down, the run back to the final boss isn't too bad, but it didn't have to be this way. The final boss of the DLC is one that people often praise, but I'm not a huge fan of it. He's not that bad, certainly better than most bosses in the base game, but I really think it's this one move where the dodge window is so short and it's almost a one-shot that really puts me off. Kind of a good example why I hope that a boss is easy when I enter the arena. The DLC as a whole is better than the base game, although this is partially because it's a lot shorter. That's not even a good reason, I know, but it's also better in some legitimate ways. As I said before, the bosses are a step in the direction which the studio would be taking, for better and for worse. And the first area is beautiful as far as the remaster's shit graphics go. Dark Souls Artorias of the Abyss gets a C and is just above Dark Souls at 14. Next up is probably the most controversial of the series, and the one people dislike the most that I've seen. Dark Souls 2. Before playing, I hadn't heard good things, but once I finished it up, I actually kinda liked it. Definitely more than Dark Souls. There are dumb things like the gang fights, long runbacks, and this mechanic where every time you die, you permanently lose a bit of health until you use an item to bring you back up to full again. It's stackable too for up to half your health. This is just a bad idea because it discourages trying new things and being risky because you're at risk of permanent consequences. Another terrible feature is adaptability. Adaptability has to be the worst idea ever. It's pretty much where when you start the game, you can still take damage even if you roll perfectly, so you have to level up the stat to make it so that you don't take damage when you shouldn't have in the first place. The way they combat this is giving you tons of souls to level up, and also making the game easy as shit again. Instead of getting a giant sword a couple hours in, I used my starter weapon the whole game, and it did great damage. It's still clear that the studio doesn't have their boss formula down, because a lot of them are really easy, having not a ton of health and a couple easy to dodge moves. As I've said before, as much as I like the easy bosses, my favorite are the ones where I'm challenged. There's a lot of clever ideas in here, but the fights are too quick for them to have any sort of impact. I do like how this feels more focused in direction than Dark Souls. You can teleport off the bat, which should have been in the first game, but Majula is also a great hub with a really calming vibe, and the entrance to every level is all in this hub. Even though I did get stuck a couple times, I still knew the general area where I was to be looking. But the real reason I like this more is the areas. This game has the advantage of having better graphics than the Dark Souls remaster that is 4 years younger, and it uses it to design these cool towering structures. There's this incredible dragon island that seems to be the inspiration of Farum Azula from Elden Ring, and the daunting Dranglaic castle that looks amazing when you approach it. A lot of enjoyment from these games comes from the world design and making it look cool, and Dark Souls 2 really pulled through. Even the areas that don't look stunning are pretty. Although, in proper Dark Souls fashion, there are some really annoying sections. My least favorite has to be this place where it's pretty much just Blighttown 2 except you can't see shit. There's also the No Man's Wharf, the stupid water area, and the spider place. But even these really bad areas feel better than the bad areas of Dark Souls because there's more detail put into them. The game is also way longer than it should be. You spend about 30 hours getting these different souls from major bosses, and then once you have them all, you go into what seems like the final area to finish the game, but then there are 8 more bosses, not including the mass amounts of different areas there are, and 4 memories. The dilemma is that there's a lot of good stuff that takes place during this drawn out period. The Dragon Island and Castle are both here, but these memories are also really cool. They put you in a different situation in which you're seeing enemies fight each other in a war and you're just witnessing it. I think the devs should have picked out the areas that didn't work and just replace them with one of the many already good ones they have. There's a lot of problems with the Dark Souls 2, and I don't really blame people for not liking it, but I had a mostly good time. The fights are easy and the world is a lot of fun to explore, and I'll talk about this more in a bit, but after Dark Souls 2 is FromSoft sort of transitioned into the studio they are today, and it's really the end of an era. Dark Souls 2 gets a B- and is number 10. But before this new era of FromSoft, we have the 3 Dark Souls 2 DLCs. FromSoft has the rep that every DLC they make is better than the base game, which is typically true, except in this case where every DLC is worse than the base game. I'm gonna go through these quickly in the order that they came out. The Sunken DLC is probably my least favorite because of the area. You're in this depressing pit with all these strong dudes, and the main mechanic of this first section is that there's all these elevators, except you have to hit a thing to activate them and it takes forever to come up, so most of this portion is spent running around dodging attacks, waiting for the elevators. The next part of the area isn't much better with all sorts of dumb contraptions, but at the very least the 2 bosses of the DLC don't suck. The first is a sorcerer who spawns in enemies which I normally hate, but once you get it down you can get rid of them pretty easily. The second boss is this dragon that's in the air for half the time because he's a pussy, and during the fight he broke both my weapons. First my sword broke and I'm like, alright, this has happened before, I'll just switch to my axe, and then that broke, so what the fuck? Why are both my weapons breaking in one fight? Luckily you can summon 2 players to help you out, which makes it easier. The Crown of the Sunken King gets a C and is number 13. Next DLC is the Old Iron King. There's not much to say about this one. I didn't really have fun with the area even though it looks cool. There were a couple times where there was a bunch of guys in the area with a lever I had to pull, and they kept hitting me right as I was about to get it. There were these totems around the level that you need items to destroy. It's all just kind of a pain in the ass. Luckily the final boss, Fume Knight, is the best in the game and provides a nice challenge, but it's not good enough to save the DLC. The Crown of the Old Iron King also gets a C and is number 12. And finally we got the Ivory King DLC. This one might be my favorite by a little bit, but that isn't saying much, especially because this one has a lot of dumb stuff. The saving grace of it is its area. It's a frozen kingdom which looks cool, but the bosses really drag this down. First we've got this tiger who is literally invisible. You can get a thing that makes him invisible, but they don't tell you that, so I spent a little while trying to kill an invisible giant tiger. Luckily after you get the item the fight isn't too hard, but this one also broke one of my weapons so I had to swap mid-fight. But then for the final fight, you got probably one of my least favorite in the series. The first half is this gang fight with 4 knights on your team and an AI summon I found, against 3 portals that spawn knights in. As the fight goes on, your knights sacrifice themselves one by one to cover up the portals stopping the waves of knights. But while it's going on, you have this big chaotic battle with a million different guys. And most of the time, even when my side outnumbers the other, I'm still getting ganged up on by 3 knights. I can't fight 3 knights at once, it's not possible. Why aren't they going for the other knights? The first half takes so long to get right because it requires so many of the bots to do the right stuff so that you don't get screwed over. Because in giant fights like this, you can be as prepared as you can be, but if you guys decide not to fight well, you could get wrecked. Luckily the second half is better because you only fight against one guy. He is pretty hard, but after learning his moves and with the help of my beast AI summon, I got the job done. I'd probably consider him to be the best boss of the game, if not for that abysmal first half. And there we go, all 3 Dark Souls 2 DLCs covered. The Crown of the Ivory King gets another C at number 11. Now we're on to the first game that really feels like the type of games they make today. Bloodborne was a step up in world design, combat, and bosses compared to the first 3 games, and I love it. I love the gothic horror setting of the game and the enemies that come with it. All the areas are so distinct while also being under the same theme. But my favorite part about Bloodborne is the combat. I'm not a huge fan of the dodge roll combat system of the other games because I find it to be too slow. I love the quick dodges in Bloodborne because I feel like I can actually keep up with the enemies. The best fights in here are the ones where you're just going head to head swinging at each other non-stop with no room for error. Everything about Bloodborne is faster. The dodges are faster, the healing is faster, you get a fucking gun. One downside is that you have to farm for heals. This is really dumb because having to farm for heals every couple of deaths is so annoying. It really takes the wind out of the pacing every time. But the thing I find most problematic is some of the bosses. Let me explain. A topic I'm going to be talking about a lot in the next coming games is something I call speed balancing. It's the balance of speed between the player and the boss, how fast the attacks come out, in comparison to how fast your character dodges. Bloodborne has a unique problem than the rest of the games with this issue because the speed balance is leaning more towards the player in a lot of fights. There are plenty of great boss fights in Bloodborne. Father Gascoigne, Bloodstarved Beast, Gurman, and Vicar Amelia being my favorite. The speed balancing is so on point for her so that the entire fight is so aggressive. Every second, I'm either hitting her or dodging an attack. Zero downtime. But there are a lot of bosses in which you're a lot faster than them, to which they feel like Dark Souls bosses. The one on Born, Murgo, Ram, all these bosses have slower but heavier attacks, but I'm so quick that I can just dodge them easy and obliterate them. This is one of the only games in which I enter a boss room and hope that I'm going to be challenged to my limit, but a lot of bosses just don't do that for me. There are only 9 mandatory bosses in the game, and there are some that are just straight up easy. Mikolash eats my hits for breakfast, and there's also these snails that can't attack you. This is the only game with this kind of combat system, but I don't think it was used to its full potential. Which, to be clear, is a good problem to have, but it's still a problem nonetheless. Bloodborne gets a solid A-, and is my 5th favorite Soulsborne game. Luckily, there is a title that takes its potential and utilizes it. The DLC for Bloodborne, The Old Hunters. Thank God we have this, because it gives me everything I wanted in Bloodborne. Right out of the gate, we have my favorite boss in all of Soulsborne games, Ludwig the Accursed. He's Vicar Amelia turned up to an 11. He is such a ruthless and aggressive boss that took me so many tries to take down, but every single one of them is so fun. The next boss is a pretty big hiccup in here with the Living Failures, which really lives up to their name, because this boss fight sucks. It's a gang fight that is only difficult because of how long the fight takes. Your weapon does barely any damage to these guys, so it's you running around dodging attacks for 20 minutes until they finally die. Luckily it redeems itself right after with Maria, another ass-kicking boss. It was fun to get another chance at fighting a hunter after Gurman because they are so quick. It means that you always have to be on your toes and really get their moves down. But then right after, we've got my second favorite boss in Soulsborne, and that is Orphan of Kos. This guy is insane. For a week straight, I would spend hours every day just fighting him, getting every single one of his moves down so well that it wouldn't mess anything up. Just like the other great bosses in Bloodborne, he's insanely aggressive. The fight is so hard and fast paced, and it just gets harder in the second phase. In this stage, Kos is so unpredictable that every dodge feels so satisfying to pull off. Every time I was doing this part, I was so nervous and excited, the feeling only a boss like this could bring you. Once I finally killed him after days of trying, I was genuinely sad that my time with him would be over, which is something I never thought I'd say about a boss in these games. The Old Hunters DLC took what Bloodborne gave it and made it the best it can be, with new fun areas and absolutely visceral boss fights that'll go down as some of the best in FromSoft history. Bloodborne: The Old Hunters gets an A and breaks my top 3. Next up is Dark Souls 3, which is the only game in the trilogy to come out during this new era of FromSoft. Even though it's one of the only 3 games that are in a series, it's the only FromSoft game that doesn't feel like a FromSoft game. And to be honest, I'm not sure really how to explain myself. It feels like a really high budget, well made fan game. For starters, we've got to talk about the world and art design. Within Dark Souls 3, we see a lot of inspiration for what Elden Ring would be in good and bad ways. And the look is definitely one of the good ways. Every area in the game looks amazing. There are stunning landscapes and castles you come across that are some of the best visuals FromSoft has ever done. The areas in Dark Souls 3 are also pretty good. There are some that are a pain in the ass like this poison forest in the dungeon, but most are really well designed and cool to explore. I like getting to a new area and checking down every path to get all the items and secrets. Seeing some of the areas from Dark Souls 1, despite how I feel about the game, were really cool. I liked getting to return to Ariandel without the dumb archers and mimic chests. I also liked how linear this game was compared to the other 2 Dark Souls, as well as it being a lot shorter. All this stuff is good, but the most conflicting part about this game for me is the bosses. So the first boss is this pretty cool knight who turns into this big monster thing in phase 2, which I really liked, but I killed him in 1 try. And the second boss is this big knight with a cool moveset, but I killed him in 2 tries. So I was like, is this game gonna be really easy? And then one of my least favorite bosses in the whole trilogy comes up, the Abyss Watchers. This is such a bad fight. When you're up against one of the knights, it's not too bad, but if you're going against 2 at a time, you can't do anything. You could try to get a hit in, but chances are you'll just get hit by one of the knights, which is how most gang fights go. Luckily, there is a knight companion who will spawn in with you, but a problem with companions in these fights, like others, is that a lot of the fight rests on the shoulders of the AI doing good and not dying immediately. Because if so, then I have to wait for him to respawn again before I can do anything, which risks me getting jumped. Another issue with it is that sometimes they'll spawn in and start attacking me, and if that happens the whole run is over because I can't do a 1v3. It's just not possible against this aggressive of an enemy. I do understand that in lore the Abyss Watchers are supposed to be brainless so that they could attack you, but having random lore facts doesn't make the fight any better. Dark Souls 3 is not adapting a book or something. They make the lore for the game, so just change it up so that it'll be a better fight. The same thing kind of applies to the heals in Bloodborne, where in a world you heal with the blood of others, which makes it so that you have to farm them a ton. But this lore addition brings down the quality of the game, so what is the point of it? The Abyss Watchers also have this feature that is luckily only present in Dark Souls 3, because it's something I do not enjoy, and that's some of the bosses having their second phase be after the first health bar. It kind of undermines and disheartens the fight when you spend so long getting down to 1 bar of health just to see it be reset. I get that it's the same thing as a boss having 2 stages and 1 health bar, but just presented differently. But I do think that these are little changes that can have big effects on the psychology of the fight. It's also because I don't like to be tricked that I've beaten a boss when I really haven't. It just pisses me off to the point that halfway through the game, I just started looking up where the bosses had 2 health bars. Some of the charm of stage 2 switches is realizing that the fight has only begun, but when it's done after you thought you beat it, it feels less scary and more annoying. Continuing on the streak of unpredictable bosses, I beat Crystal Sage, Deacons of the Deep, and Wolnir with ease, and then I got a huge skill check with Pontiff. At the very least he wasn't dumb like the Abyss Watchers, but damn he was hard. He's so quick you have to parry his attacks to get damage in. Then after a couple more easy bosses, we get to my favorite boss in the trilogy so far, Dragon Slayer Armor. This guy is a great example of how to make a boss fun with this combat. He's aggressive and heavy without being unfair, so the fight really felt fast paced. Even with the flying things shooting stuff at me, it still felt tangible because everything could be dodged. Unfortunately the rest of the bosses wouldn't be as good, but they certainly weren't bad. The Lothric twins were challenging and doable, and the Soul Cinder was a good final fight. I liked everything about it except the stupid spear part in the first phase. There's these 2 attacks that he has with the spear, a charge or a quick jab, and both have the same windup. so it's almost impossible to know which attack he's going to do, so you have to guess. Luckily, that's the hardest part of the fight, and the rest is good. All in all, I thought I liked Dark Souls 3 better, but it is a good title and definitely better than the rest of the trilogy. It's just a shame that none of them have an incredible entry. I also think part of why I feel this way is how short it is. While I did like it at the time because I had played the entire trilogy in a row and was kind of ready to be done, it made it so that I had less of a connection to it. I'm planning on talking about this idea more in a future video. At the end of the day, it's an enjoyable game, but certainly doesn't reach the heights of some others I'll be talking about. Dark Souls 3 gets a B and is in spot number 8. But Dark Souls 3 isn't where this trilogy ends. There's still 2 more DLCs to review. The first one being Ashes of Ariandel. I hope I said that right. This is a pretty middle-of-the-road DLC. The area is pretty cool, I think. I always like the snowy area of these games. They just pull off the aesthetic so well. But it all kind of melds together for me while thinking back on it. There's only one boss in this DLC, which is nice, but I don't really like it that much. Primarily because, remember when I was saying how I didn't like the 2 health bar stage bosses? Yeah, this one's got 3. The second one is a gang fight, and the third one is this super aggressive stage where you can't ever get a hit in. I just really don't like this format of boss. Luckily, after many tries, the player summon and I clutched up and we both survived to the end, but it was a brutal run to get there. It's a pretty good but forgettable DLC. Ashes of Ariandel gets a B-, and a little lower at number 9. And now we get the last title in the Dark Souls franchise, which is the Ring City DLC. This one is a lot bigger than the previous one, and a lot better. While the areas aren't as good in my opinion because of the flying things that shoot at you, they're still really enjoyable. It's so cool when the gargoyles fly you over the mountain to the Ring City. Stuff like that in Dark Souls never gets old. The first boss is a gang boss, but I honestly kinda like it, mostly because it's pretty easy, especially with the summon. The second boss, not so much. I'm not a huge fan of bosses being the same size as me in these games because of how nimble and stingy they can be, and this one is really bad. Especially when a little summon gets brought in multiple times throughout the fight, so it becomes a really bad gang fight for a bit. But thank God for online, because turns out other players can become the boss. So after a bunch of tries not really getting anywhere, someone named Church of Pee Pee Poo Poo invaded my game and just let me win. I'll be honest here, if he didn't save me from that fight, the score would have been lower. So I got super lucky. And then we have the best boss in the whole trilogy. And honestly, the best boss made with the core Dark Souls combat system. Slave Knight Gale. I heard a lot about how hard he was leading up to the fight, so I was nervous, but turns out he's incredible. He's the most aggressive boss in the previous games except Bloodborne, which could easily be misused, but it's not because you can dodge everything and get plenty of hits in. This feels like a Bloodborne fight for how exhilarating it is. Just constant back and forth. I never thought a fight with a dodgeball mechanic could be this fun, but it is. Gale has 3 stages, and every one of them gets harder and crazier until in the third he's bouncing around everywhere and going insane, and it's still doable. Such a fun boss fight and brings this DLC up so much. I really hope to see more fights like this from FromSoft in the future. The Ring City is a solid B+, my 7th favorite game. Next up is my favorite FromSoft game of them all, and I'd wager to guess most would agree with me. That's Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. This game is a straight banger, what can I say? The Japanese setting is one they need to come back to in the future because they do it so beautifully. The castles and nature are all so gorgeous. My 2 favorite locations are the whole endgame place and the Sunken Valley. They're so fucking beautiful. So much detail into making it look straight out of an old Japanese painting. I would love to see more in the future. There's also new movement with the grappling hook and jumping. I think these additions are awesome, and it really adds to the nimbleness of your character. But the real crown jewel of Sekiro is the combat. I honestly don't think it could get better than this. The faster the pace, the better. It completely fixed the speed balance problem that I was talking about before, because they can make the quickest, most ruthless enemies in the game, and you could parry everything. One button press and no cooldown, no matter how fast the swings are. There's a guy in here that pulls out a fucking pistol, and every bullet can be parried. There's a stun meter that drops quick, so you have to be super aggressive to make sure you kill enemies. That being said, it obviously isn't easy, although I will stand by that it's not the hardest game. Some of my favorite bosses are the True Monk, Genichiro, and Ishin. All of them so methodical and swift that it makes blocking everything so satisfying. A lot of the bosses in Souls games I feel like I got through pretty easily so I didn't have to learn them, or they're so bullshit that I feel like it was luck that it happened. But almost every boss in here makes me get them down perfectly before I can best them. And not in a dumb way either. Sword Saint Ishin is not a bad boss fight. I'm not that good at these games, and I beat him alright, and I can do it again. It's just a long fight, but once you get him down, you can do everything. There's only really 2 fights I'm not a huge fan of. One of them is the Duel Ape fight, which, surprise, is a gang fight. I like the first part where it's just a 1v1, but once the other ape comes in, it goes back to typical FromSoft gang fights, where you can't try and get a hit on a guy without the other guy hitting you. I feel like that type of fight wasn't made for Sekiro because the way these boss fights are normally done is by waiting around for an attack opening and dealing a bit of damage before dodging away again. But in Sekiro you have to be aggressive, so that doesn't really work. The other is Owl. I didn't have trouble with him on my first playthrough, but on my second I struggled with him so much for some reason. I just think some of his moves are typical FromSoft annoyances, which makes some deaths feel cheap. Other than these two, every fight is a blast, and that is a really hard thing to pull off. In half of these games, I don't even find one boss fight to be good, but Sekiro is a full game. Even the fights I didn't mention like the General, Guardian Ape, and Divine Dragon, which is a super cool fight. All of them are so fun, and that's what really puts this game apart from the others. Everything is so fun. More importantly, it's fair. I really hope they make a sequel, or even better, an open world game with these systems. Either way, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice gets an A and is my favorite Soulsborne game at number 1. And now for a final base game of the review, the most popular FromSoft game, Elden Ring. Elden Ring is the game I played the most, but it is also the one I have the most complicated relationship with. To start off, I'll just say, my favorite part about it is the world. You've heard me say it before, but there is so much passion that goes into the lands between. There are so many towering structures that look incredible, so many little secrets that lead to huge areas. There's just so much good shit. I've spent over 100 hours playing Elden Ring, and I know I haven't found even close to everything. Elden Ring is the type of game only FromSoft could make, and one of the only AAA studios out there making truly quality stuff. The art style is so beautiful, every landscape looks hand-drawn to perfection. I couldn't say enough good things about this game. I could go from area to area praising its perfection. Academy, Lucaria, Leyndell, Stormvale, so many amazing locations. Elden Ring feels like the amalgamation of FromSoft's great world design, and I'm not sure I could get any better in future titles. But the world isn't what makes this so complicated for me. It's the combat. This whole time, each game I've been talking about what fights I like and why, what type of combat I love and what I find bullshit. Elden Ring has almost all my least favorite bosses in all of FromSoft games. The first one, Margit, is one of my least favorite. I think it's a great example of how not to do speed balancing. The first stage isn't too bad, it's certainly difficult but it's doable, but then the second stage is so much worse. The speed at which so many of Margit's attacks come out is too fast for you to ever get a hit in, and sometimes too fast to even dodge. The whole thing becomes dodging him for 5 minutes and then getting one hit in. And as you'll see as we go along, that's my least favorite type of fight. I love to be aggressive where I can constantly knock down the enemy's health. It makes for much more of an engaging and exciting battle. I think Margit would be a great Bloodborne fight with how fast he is, but the role in Elden Ring is too slow for you to be able to do anything but just keep dodging. It feels more like a battle of patience rather than a battle of actual skill, just waiting for him to make the one move that gives me an opening. This is the case with a lot of bosses in Elden Ring. Renala is just firing spells at you until you finally make your way up to her to hit her once. Malekith, holy shit, he's really like this. He's way too fast for the moveset. There are plenty of bosses that are the right speed though, but they don't bring the same excitement as the great bosses in other games do. Godric is a good one. His attacks are slower but still aggressive, making it so that you still have to do good to dodge them, but you're able to get in hits too. The Wolf, even though he does have a dumb magic move, you can still get hits in. These fights aren't as hard, but they're certainly more fun because it's an actual fight and not a dodging simulator. A lot of discourse on the difficulty of these games is whether a fight can be considered bad if it's too hard. A lot of people argue that the fun is in the challenge, and if it's too hard for you then maybe it's not your type of game. And for a while I figured that they were right and it's not my type of game. But after playing so many of them and enjoying so many fights, some with the combat of Elden Ring, I see that I can love a fight regardless of the difficulty. It's just that there's actual work you have to put into making it fun. There are so many bosses in Elden Ring that lose sight of what makes these things fun and just make you ram your head into a wall until you get lucky and they don't hit you with some bullshit one-shot attack. Fire Giant has too much health. It would be a good fight, but it goes on for way too long. The Godskin duo was clearly not thought out at all, and there's just 2 bosses you have to fight at once. I'll come out and say it. There's not a single good gang fight in FromSoft history. None are good. This combat was not made for fighting 2 people at once. Even the final boss, the Elden Beast, is just running away from you the whole time. There are good fights mixed in here. I like both Godfreys. They have the speed of Godric while still being ruthless. Every attack is dodgeable and actually feels like a 1v1 battle. But even with these, there's just too many fights that I don't like, even the optional ones. I don't completely fault the game for this because there are so many people who do love the bosses, so part of it is clearly them not being for me, but I do feel that after playing all these games that I have some sort of credibility. It's just a shame because the rest of the game is so good. And I know that there are other ways to approach the game like with magic, but I find that also to not be as fun. Even with bosses I don't like, I feel like the idea is still that head-to-head melee combat, and waiting for an opening just to press a button and fire some giant laser doesn't feel right to me. So much of this part of the game just isn't for me, and for the longest time I tried to avoid it. But earlier this year my friends and I were replaying Elden Ring together, and while stuck on a hard boss, I found the most fun way to play the game: multiplayer. Elden Ring feels like it was made for playing with your friends. There are so many giant bosses with big attacks that most can take out in a group without being overrun, and with the large amount of unique builds you can make, everyone can have a different role while fighting. Elden Ring multiplayer was the most fun I've ever had playing, and they should really add a modem for that in the starting screen or something. The speed balancing is suddenly okay because if you do get hit by some attacks, you still have one or two other people to pick up your slack. And it's also fun to strategize keeping the host alive while still engaging in the battle. The once infuriating fights become so much fun with others. And that's the part I haven't really talked about when referring to Elden Ring, and that's the community. So much of the joy of this game comes from the talking about it online or all the messages scattered throughout the map. There's such a sense of community when you see the comments of a walkthrough or a Twitter thread talking about an area nobody knew about. I'll never forget when Elden Ring first came out and everyone was posting their clips online. It helps the pain of the struggle when you know that there are hundreds of thousands of people going through it with you. When I first played Elden Ring, I was really harsh on it, and I still am to a degree, but over the years I've grown to appreciate so much of what it's done and the work FromSoft has put into it. Elden Ring is a strong A- and is my fourth favorite. And finally, we have the last game in the series, the newly released DLC for Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. There's been some controversy surrounding it, but I've just gotta say, wow. This is insane. I haven't played a DLC this big since The Witcher Blood and Wine. The map is so big with so many new areas. It feels bigger than the base game because of how dense and layered it is. I love the new more nature-focused areas. I get that these games are supposed to be depressing, but I really wish FromSoft did this more because they do it so beautifully. There's this scary forest that I wish had more stuff in it, but the vibes are so cool. It feels like at any moment, something could jump out at you. The new castles are awesome. I love the specimen room. It's cool climbing all over the dead creatures. And the final area is sick. This magical kingdom suspended in the air. There's hidden dungeons and areas into other areas. It's also compact. But the controversy isn't surrounding the amazing world design. Every time a new Souls game comes out, you've got people complaining about how it's too hard. And the same thing is happening for this one. And I know you've probably heard this opinion a bunch of times from streamers and such, but I'm gonna say it again. The whole fucking point of these games is that they're hard and they get harder with every entry. That's the idea. They're hard games. And the part I find funny is that people are saying the same stuff I was just saying about Elden Ring's bosses about these ones. That they're too fast and have no room for openings. I found these bosses to be a lot more enjoyable than Elden Ring's. Although I will say that some of it might be due to me using a mimic tier for all of them. When it comes to the discourse surrounding Elden Ring, it involves a lot of good players shaming others for using stuff like broken builds and mimic tiers, but they're the exact same people who quit the DLC because it's too hard. I play the game however I find it to be the most fun, and when it came to this DLC, I found a lot of joy in using a mimic tier during fights, and honestly for someone with my skill level, I'd say that's the most optimal way to fight them. My favorites were Mesmer, Bale, and Divine Dancing Lion. These are three insanely visceral bosses with so much spectacle. I loved fighting them all, and they're now some of my favorite in Souls games. The path to Bale is so cool, going up the jagged peak with all the fog and lightning, and then the fight is batshit crazy. The second phase he starts flying up, firing fireballs at you, comes down to this big ass explosion, such a cool fight. And the Divine Lion fight is awesome, especially the track. It goes hard. Best video game boss music. I died sometimes because I was jamming too hard. I mean, just listen to this shit. Alright, that's enough. I will agree that there are some bosses with ridiculous moves. The Commander Gaius and the Bull Charge attack, Mesmer's spear jabs, Sinuax, or however the fuck you say that in his lightning moves, and especially the final boss. This is without a doubt the hardest in the whole series. He is so hard. And it mostly comes down to his second phase moveset. How the fuck are these supposed to be dodged? Not even Bloodborne dodges could work against this. I would watch a video on how to do it, and you'd have to be so precise with how you dodge each crazy attack. I honestly believe that he should get nerfed at least a little bit. That being said, I did have fun fighting him, but even after days of trying, I eventually just beat it with my friend in multiplayer. I think that really comes back to playing it in the way that's most fun. I can't say that I'm proud of not doing it all by myself, but I had put in so many hours, and any more and it would have started becoming unfun. But still, at the end of the day, this is FromSoft's best DLC. I had so much fun exploring this new world and fighting every wild boss. Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is an A, my second favorite. There we go. Every Soulsborne game and DLC ranked. But I don't want to finish it just yet. I want to share some ideas of what I think future Soulsborne games should be. For starters, I'd love an open world game with a faster combat system like Sekiro or Bloodborne. FromSoft has shown that they are the masters of world design and combat design, but they haven't put two and two together yet. So if they did, it would be their best game, no question. I'd also like to see them step into other time periods. I like the unique ones like Japan and Sekiro and Goth Europe and Bloodborne. I'd love to see them step into other areas of the world. And my choice would be to have you play as a pirate. There are not really any good RPG pirate games where you actually just play as a pirate, and I'd love FromSoft to take that on. There's so many weapons and styles they could implement, as well as a large enemy variety. There's all sorts of bosses they could do like other pirates, sea creatures, and the undead. If you've watched the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you can see all that untapped potential that they could take advantage of. I doubt they do it because it seemed kind of out of left field, but I just need a pirate game out there. That's all for my wish list of games they can make. I don't really have anything else to say other than if you want to see my exact ranking of the Soulsborne series, you can check that out on Backlogged. The link to my profile will be in the description. And if you want to see how I think about other games, check out my other reviews. I post once every other week with either a review or a video essay about games, so subscribe for more of that. And of course, thanks for watching and sticking to the end. I want to do more big reviews of game series, and your support is super appreciated in making that possible. Make sure to give this video a like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.